about this abandoned tractor on the course US, and it took my eye, I think, quite soon after I moved to US. I just thought it looked so sad. You know, it was once loved, and here it was now lying sort of naked and abandoned in a rather sorrowful state. A shadow of its former glory, although I instantly recognized it as actually being an old grey Fergie, but without all its covers. And so when we got given the brief about cultural heritage, I decided to do my project around this tractor. I started off comparing this tractor with exactly the same model of tractor that we own back on the mainland. It was my husband's first tractor, and it's been fully restored, and it is now his pride and joy. Clearly in a much better condition than the wrecked one, but also in a much better condition than it ever was when it left the factory. This is one of his prized possessions. It has its own heater and blanket and sits in its own little shed. And if you drive it, you have to miss the puddles. But it was once a mass-produced utility vehicle before it became this highly desirable collector's item. But on US, here we have this tractor sort of returning to nature. It's more like it reflects the culture, the acceptance of the temporary nature of life. There's no desire to go to great lengths to preserve something beyond its natural use, and once it ceases to be functional, it ceases really to have that same use and value. So here the tractor is just left to the mercy of the elements, something which, you know, my husband considered almost to be a criminal offence. My work has actually been looking and comparing these two tractors and the two different ways in which the value is perceived. So I started off looking digitally at trying to do various different types of composite image, and that's just a couple of examples of the sorts of things that I looked at. To look at the transformation from what it would have been like when it was new to how it is now, to how it could be if it was once restored. Because my husband's tractor was in a similar state, in fact possibly worse, before it was restored to what it looks like today. So it was really looking at that transformation, you know, the deterioration into the rusty relic, and what it was and what it could have been. Then I started to really get quite attached to the tractor on the committee road and started to do some research about its history and how it came to the island and where it came from. And this is a picture here. I'm pretty sure this is the one on the committee road being worked by its original owner on a croft in Knockntorren. And this is my husband on his tractor. So you can see them here sort of in their glory. But even here you can see this one's quite battered and beaten. You know, this was a working tractor. But when I spoke to somebody who had inherited it from their wife's uncle, who was the original owner, they confirmed that it had in fact transformed crofting practices on the island, replacing the horses because they were cheap to buy and because they were easy to maintain, which was important for an island community. Very soon every crofter had one, and this was, you know, the next innovative thing to have. It was also a very innovative design. In fact, it was the first tractor to have the 3-point linkage, which meant that rather than just pulling something, you could actually work an implement. And there was a whole range of implements that went with them. But of course, this tractor was given by the family that inherited it to another family on the Solas side, and was simply just being used only to bring in peat. That was now its only use, and left out one night in the frost, which is actually quite rare for US, and its engine block cracked, and it hasn't moved since. I can't find the exact date that it started to sit there, but that is the sad tale of the committee road tractor. But of course, another aspect of this project for me was that it was the equivalent of the Ford motor car, and in fact, in America, the Fergusons were produced by Ford. It was only because Ferguson fell out with Ford here that they weren't produced at Dagenham by Ford, but in Coventry by the Standard Motor. Is it Standard? I can't remember the company now. By the Standard Motor Company. But in Coventry, in the 20 years that they were made, over 1 million of these tractors were actually made. 66% of which were exported to the Empire, which was why there was suddenly such a huge market for these tractors. So for me, I took up printing as a way of thinking about that mass production, because obviously you can keep producing that same image. And for me, it became a sort of a meditative practice. You know, every time I printed a tractor, I was just thinking about and kind of almost connecting with the spirit of the image and all that it stood for. And I tried various different sorts of printing. I started off with polystyrene, and then moved on to lino, which gave a much better, much clearer, cleaner print. But I also did mono printing, and I did colograph printing. But it was all about being able to keep reproducing that same image. And I worked with the same two images all the way through this whole project. So every single picture of the old tractor and the restored tractor is exactly the same image all the way through this project. And actually, they've all been, I've very carefully changed them so that one overlays the other quite accurately. So then I started to think again about, the culture of US and what it was about US that leads people to just abandon their vehicles. and I don't know if any of you know of a documentary maker called Jonathan Meades, but he's made a documentary called Off Kilter, which it goes on about the rusty relics, actually of Lewis, not of Lewis. And it's well worth a watch. But it is true what he says, as you drive around, and this is just a couple of examples, some have obviously been there a lot longer, but this one is actually more recent. I remember seeing this van actually on the road when I first came. But that is what people do. This one has quite deliberately been placed up on a hill, almost as an advert, but I'm not sure what a crushed rusty van will do for you as an advert, even if it's sign written. So it's almost as if people do think of them as in some kind of sculptural context. They are sort of ad hoc, rusting, ephemeral sculptures, because some do seem to have been quite deliberately placed, or at least abandoned in some extremely strange locations. So that brought me back to thinking about what it was, because on the mainland, it's not something that I'm familiar with. It very much seems to me to be an aspect of island culture, that this is their way of almost burying and saying goodbye to their implements. So then I started thinking, well, what is the difference between these rusty relics that you see lying around, almost defacing the landscape, and sculptures which have been put there quite deliberately to enhance it and have a cultural significance and value. And so I retraced the steps of our little tour that we did at the beginning of the year, looking at the different sculptures and all that really made the difference, that took something and made it into a sculpture rather than a rusty piece of rubbish that people complained about, was the fact that they had a plaque, or that they had been demarked in some ways. They maybe had been fenced and had a gate, but otherwise they were just something that had been placed or left in the landscape. So I started to think, well, all I need to do then for my tractor, which by this time I was quite fond of, was to get it a plaque to change, and that would change its context. It would then not be some piece of abandoned rubbish and an eyesore, but it would then become something of cultural merit and value simply by getting a plaque. So that was my next project. I did some more research into the history of the tractor. I went and I spoke with the community. I went to a couple of solace coffee mornings and started to talk to people about the concept of this tractor not actually being a piece of abandoned rubbish, but actually being a sculpture, to see what they felt, what feelings they had about this tractor, and what feelings that they had about other sculptures, such as the road end sculptures. And that, for me, was very interesting, because they had accepted the tractor as being part of the landscape and as blending with the landscape. And in fact, being part of the culture of US, whereas the road end sculptures, they said looked quite alien in the landscape. Not just the sculpture itself, but the way in which the stone had, the gable end stone, the lintel stone had been put on its end for the plaque to be put on. And so I started to think about how I wanted to display the plaque for my tractor, and decided that what I wanted was a piece of stone that looked like it was part of the landscape. Now, fortunately, Jean, the geologist, was at the Solace Coffee mornings, and so was able to identify where I could take a stone without actually having to impact on the landscape as it was, because that seemed to be a key requirement for them. That we kept it blending in with the landscape, and I didn't move stones that were already part of the landscape. So we managed to find a disused quarry very close to my tractor, to move the stone and to place it as if, and in a few years, once all the tracks and the digger got a little bit stuck putting it in place, have gone, that hopefully will start to look as if it is a stone that's part of the landscape. And so now we have, not just something that is part of the cultural heritage of US, but also a monument to Ferguson and the grey Fergie, which was such an iconic tractor, and still lives on, in many people's hearts now. But of course, plaques don't come for nothing. I needed to get ahead with doing graphics to make the plaque, and so I needed to raise money to fund the plaque. So I tried various things. I tried selling T-shirts on the internet, and you'd be amazed how many people were prepared to have Birthday Relic written across their chest, although somebody else did suggest I make underpants, but I haven't gone that far. And I also did one with the restored tractor on that had Fergie's fan on, and they were also popular amongst the farming fraternity on the mainland. I tried crowd art, offering prints as rewards, but I'm not sure. I think I didn't really use a very good crowdfunding site. That didn't actually take off as successfully, but what has been quite successful is greetings cards. Norman has bought quite a lot for Tykersia, for example. So it's been very interesting to me just looking at the different ways of possibly doing funding. So that for me was part of sort of my professional development, if you like, looking at how one might find the money to do what you want to do, because as a piece of public art, it's there for everybody to see and enjoy, and itself isn't going to actually raise any funds. I then, of course, now that the project had grown somewhat, I did think that I ought to speak to the person who owns the tractor about what I was doing. And he tried to sell me the tractor, was very keen to sell me the tractor as a going concern. He told me that if I pushed it to the road, it would go. I don't know when he last visited it, and I don't know whether it was because I have an English accent. I'm not too sure, but it got me thinking really about the way different people, perceive the value. We have the one, that we have that goes to shows that wins prizes, and so I took the rosettes that we had run, one at home, and bought them and put them on the tractor here. And then when Angus tried to sell me the tractor, I did sort of think, well, and it seemed to be that, well, everything is for sale at the right price, isn't it? So I thought it would be quite amusing to suggest that, well, this tractor, it may look abandoned, but it's actually just waiting for somebody to buy it. And he still seemed to think that it was worth a fair amount of money. But of course, the tractor really, its original value was its utility value. It was a working vehicle. It wasn't for any kind of sentimental or trophy or, cultural purpose. It was simply to make the corn and plough the fields. And so I developed these three photographs, really looking at the different sorts of cultural values, the different sorts of attitude that people have to the value of man-made objects and materialism and money. And I thought that they sort of told that story quite well of the transformation of the way people perceive the Gracebergers over time. So then it came to the stone moving day, and of course with the selling of the T-shirts, I used Facebook a lot to sell the T-shirts, and so Susie from the Island News got to read about the project, and so she asked to be there for the stone moving. It did become, I think, a little bit of a happening because we had Susie in attendance, Saskia was there in attendance, and this chap, I'd been told to phone Roddy, who would be the digger driver of my dreams and would come and move my stone. So we got out of the car and I said, "Hello, Roddy," and he shook my hand and he picked up my stone. He was a little bit dubious, and off we trundled. Of course, the digger promptly got stuck in the mud. And then we discovered he wasn't Roddy, and he wasn't a digger driver. Then Dennis turned up, and Michelle turned up. And we're now in danger of having two rusting rags stuck in the mud. But fortunately, the proper digger driver was on hand, and I think once we'd all disappeared, he came and managed to extract his digger from the site, and we were able to put the plaque in place. But now that the sculpture was there and was installed, of course, the next thing we needed to do was to make sure that people knew it was there. And so you should all have a nice little postcard, which are freely available, and I've sneaked them into the Tycuster shop. And we'll probably be sneaking them into a few other places, like tourist information and the smokehouse and that sort of thing. And so that people can pick them up, can send them to people, and can get to know the sculpture. I've set up a Facebook page too. I'm not sure how that would go, but it would be lovely to be able to collect people's comments and reactions, good and bad. And I thought, well, that is a vehicle by which we can do that. So it's still very much early days, although it has been in the press. I think a few people do know about it. I haven't had any bad or good reaction yet, so that's maybe a blessing. Roddy, the digger driver, did say that when I went to pay him, he did say that if there was going to be a bad reaction, he would have heard about it by now. So I think I'm possibly in the clear. And also, I noticed that the US Sculpture Guide had run out of print, and so I thought I would maybe make a new edition, including my little sculpture. So they maybe sneaked around, it's a bit of a guerrilla act as well. So that really sums up my project. But really just to say, Gail, when you spoke to us about curating as cultural practice, you talked a lot about building audience and stakeholders. And this has very much been a sort of a team effort. And I think from the beginning, I've worked with quite a lot of other people, and you've got other people on board. So it's not just all the people that have bought the T-shirts and the students here and the tutors here, but we have Mariad, the translator, Lorraine, the graphic designer, Roddy, the digger driver, DJ, who wasn't the digger driver. It was actually a gentleman I go to church with, David, who put me onto the Jonathan Meads documentary and did some of the historical and cultural research for me. Susie, who did the media and publicity, Gina, who did procurement, bringing me the Financial Times from the mainland. Jean, who did all the geological stuff. Michelle was an assistant photographer because I needed to be in one of the pictures. Dennis was the joiner for my display here, and the assistant site designer. Austin did the picture framing. Ian did the printing. My husband Ron supplied a lot of the props. And then there's the two Roddy McDougalls from the either ends of the Committee Road that helped me with the cultural and historical research. So there's been a lot of people involved in this project, without whom we would not have had a project. So it's been very much about bringing them in and carrying them along with the concept and the idea, which for some of the people that were are sort of from US, it's been quite I think quite a leap for them to get a hold of the sort of the concept of what I'm about. But I have really enjoyed working with them as the project's developed.